He moved into apartment 306 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. And in that short time, my nights have stopped being quiet. They've stopped being predictable, stopped being mundane. Since he arrived, my entire world has tilted on its axis, and I find myself living in a story I never thought could be real. There's a mystery lurking just across the hall, a secret so profound it chills me to the bone. And the crazy thing? It's not fear that keeps me awake. It's him. He's the mystery, the secret, the reason for every sleepless night. And I should be terrified. I should be packing my bags and running as fast as I can in the opposite direction. But the truth is, I can't. I'm drawn to him, against my will, against every instinct I have. And I hate it. I absolutely hate him for it. Let me back up a bit. My name is Clara. I'm 25. And I live in what used to be a perfectly ordinary apartment building, in a perfectly ordinary part of the city. I'm a journalism student, always chasing a story, always digging for the truth. I thrive on facts, on logic, on things that make sense. My apartment, number 305, has been my sanctuary for the past 3 years. It's got a decent view, a little balcony where I can sip my coffee in the mornings, and, until recently, the best neighbors a girl could ask for. Mrs. Henderson upstairs, who bakes the most incredible apple pie. Mr. Peterson downstairs, who always has a friendly wave. And George, our doorman, a sweetheart in his early 60s who knows everyone's business and keeps the building running like a well-oiled machine. My life here was, well, it was normal. I'd just gotten out of a relationship that had fizzled out, leaving me feeling a little jaded, a little bored. So I decided to throw myself into my studies, into my part-time job at the local newspaper, into anything that would keep my mind occupied and away from dating apps. I was looking for a good story, something real, something tangible. I had no idea the biggest story of my life was about to move in right across the hall. It was a Tuesday evening, around 8 p.m., when the moving truck pulled up outside. Not a normal moving time, but I didn't think much of it. I was coming back from the gym, sweaty and tired, just wanting to shower and crash. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, and that's when I saw him. He was standing by the mailboxes, impossibly tall, even taller than George, who's a good 6 feet. He was wearing a dark suit, perfectly tailored, which seemed ridiculously formal for moving day. His skin was pale, almost luminous, and his dark hair was pulled back from a striking angular face. His eyes, though, those were what truly struck me. Dark, deep, like pools of midnight, and they seemed to hold an ancient, unreadable quality. He looked up as I entered, and his gaze fixed on me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was an intense, almost predatory stare that made my skin prickle. He held it for 3 seconds, maybe 4, an eternity in human interaction. It felt like he was seeing straight through me, evaluating me. I felt a flush creep up my neck. I'm usually pretty good at holding my own, but his presence was just overwhelming. "You live here?" he asked, his voice a low, resonant baritone that sent a shiver down my spine. It was smooth, almost hypnotic. I bristled, annoyed by his bluntness and the intensity of his stare. "Unfortunately, now you do too, I guess." A slow, knowing smile spread across his lips, revealing perfectly white teeth. It was an infuriatingly beautiful smile, laced with an arrogant amusement. How welcoming. He took a step towards me, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a tremor of something like fear. Then he turned and walked towards the elevator, leaving me standing there, feeling thoroughly flustered and inexplicably irritated. I decided right then and there that I hated him. He was pretentious, arrogant, and just too much. My initial dislike for my new neighbor, Ethan Drake, quickly morphed into a growing curiosity, bordering on obsession. It started subtly, I'd noticed things, small, unsettling details that didn't quite add up. First, there was the moving process itself. He only seemed to move things in after dark. No boxes during the day, just a stream of quiet activity from his apartment after sunset. Then, the silence. Absolute, profound silence. I rarely heard a TV, music, or even general conversation coming from apartment 306. My walls aren't soundproof. I can usually hear my other neighbors living their lives, but from his place, nothing. It was like a void. Then there were his habits, or lack thereof. I never saw him leave for work in the morning. Never saw him come back in the evening. I tried to catch a glimpse of him through my peephole. I'll admit it. I wanted to see if he ever truly left. And he did, but only after dusk, always impeccably dressed, as if he were attending a black tie event, even if he was just going out for what I assumed were errands. He was never out during the day. Ever. When we did cross paths, usually in the hall or the lobby, he was always perfectly composed, always elegant, always polite to a fault. He'd hold the door for me, offer a brief, formal greeting. But his eyes, those dark, intense eyes, they never truly softened. They always watched me, observed me, as if he were trying to solve a complex puzzle, and I was a particularly perplexing piece. It felt like he was analyzing me, learning my patterns, memorizing my reactions, and there was always that slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head, like he was listening to something beyond human hearing. It gave me the creeps, but it also made me want to know more. He was an anomaly in my perfectly logical world, and my journalistic instincts were screaming. The final straw for my feigned indifference came about a week after he moved in. It was 2 a.m. I was sound asleep, dreaming of deadlines and coffee, when a loud crash jolted me awake. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, followed by a rhythmic thudding, as if furniture was being dragged across the floor. It went on for what felt like an eternity. 10 minutes. 20. My irritation reached a boiling point. This was just ridiculous. I threw off my covers, grabbed my ratty old robe, and stormed out of my apartment. I didn't care what I looked like. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. My new neighbor was clearly a menace, and I was going to give him a piece of my mind. I hammered on the door of 306. Once. Twice. The noise from inside abruptly stopped. I waited, fuming, listening to the silence. After a moment, I heard a soft click, and the door opened a crack, then wider. There he stood, Ethan Drake. At 2 a.m., he looked like he'd just stepped out of a magazine photo shoot. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his clothes, a silk dressing gown over what looked like very expensive pajamas, were immaculate. Not a wrinkle, not a single hair out of place. He smelled faintly of old paper and something earthy, something I couldn't quite place. And he was smiling that infuriatingly charming, slightly condescending smile. "Good evening, Clara," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" I glared at him, crossing my arms. "Unexpected visit. It's 2 a.m. I'm trying to sleep. And it sounds like you're trying to rearrange your entire apartment. What on earth are you doing?" He blinked slowly, his dark eyes seeming to deepen with amusement. "My sincerest apologies. I didn't realize my nocturnal activities would disturb you. I was merely reorganizing some rather delicate collections." "Delicate collections that sound like they weigh a ton," I retorted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Look, I get it. You're new here. But you need to be mindful of your neighbors. Some of us actually have normal sleep schedules." He tilted his head, his smile unwavering, but his eyes held a glint I couldn't quite decipher. "Normal sleep schedules. I understand. You have my word. I shall endeavor to be a more ordinary neighbor." The way he lingered on the word ordinary made it sound like an insult. "Just try to be a normal person, okay?" I said, feeling a fresh wave of annoyance wash over me. His smile faded, replaced by a strangely serious expression. He looked at me, a long, thoughtful look, as if he were weighing something profound. "A normal person," he repeated softly, almost to himself. Then he met my gaze directly. "I will try, Clara. For you. I will try." He closed the door gently, leaving me standing in the silent hallway, my heart pounding, not entirely from anger. I walked back to my apartment, still fuming, but also intrigued. He was an infuriating enigma, and I hated that I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't just let it go. My journalistic instincts kicked in, overriding my common sense. I needed to know more about Ethan Drake. What was his deal? Why was he so strange? Why did he only come alive at night? My first stop was Google. I typed in Ethan Drake apartment 306. Nothing. Ethan Drake NYC. A few irrelevant results. No social media. No online footprint whatsoever. It was as if he didn't exist before he showed up here. That in itself was a huge red flag. Next, I cornered George, the doorman, during his shift. George knows everything that happens in the building. "So, George," I started casually, "how's the new guy in 306 settling in? Mr. Drake, right?" George nodded, polishing the marble counter. "Oh, Mr. Drake, very polite. Always says hello. But a bit quiet, you know? And he keeps odd hours. Never really see him during the day. Just comes and goes at night. Pays his rent on time, though, and never complains. A bit cold, maybe." "Cold?" I asked, leaning in. "Just not very warm, you know? Like he's always thinking of something else. But a good tenant, I suppose, keeps to himself." So, my observations weren't just me imagining things. George confirmed it. Ethan Drake was an enigma, and I was determined to solve him. My investigation wasn't just online or through George. It involved a lot of casual run-ins, where I'd try to observe him, maybe even provoke a reaction. One evening, I found myself in the building's communal laundry room, folding a load of clothes. It was late, past midnight, and the room was usually empty at that hour. But then the door opened, and in walked Ethan, carrying a small, dark bag. Just one bag. He didn't seem surprised to see me, just gave a faint nod. "Good evening, Clara," he said, his voice soft in the quiet room. "Ethan," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, but my heart did a little flutter. He placed his bag in an empty machine and started it, then leaned against the wall, watching the spin cycle. The silence stretched between us, thick and a little awkward. I focused on my socks, trying to ignore him. Then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You always do everything alone." I looked up, surprised. "I prefer it that way," I retorted defensively. "Less drama." He gave a slight, almost melancholic smile. "I understand the feeling." His gaze drifted away, out the window, looking at the city lights. For a moment, his usual composure seemed to crack, revealing a flicker of something weary. It was the first time he hadn't seemed like a perfect, unfeeling statue. It caught me off guard. Another night, I was having one of those evenings where nothing felt right. A bad day at work, a nagging sense of loneliness. So, naturally, I was at the 24-hour market at 11 p.m., seeking comfort in a tub of ice cream. As I was heading to the checkout, I saw him. Ethan. He was in the wine aisle, not looking at regular bottles, but at the darkest, most opaque ones, the kind that came in heavy, almost black glass. He picked one up, examining the label with a thoughtful expression. "Party?" I asked, trying for a light, teasing tone. He looked up, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Something like that. And you, Clara, insomnia." He gestured with his chin at my ice cream. I shrugged, a small smile playing on my lips. "Something like that." There was a moment of shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of our parallel nocturnal habits. It was a strange kind of camaraderie, born out of the late hour and our mutual strangeness. He paid for his wine, I paid for my ice cream, and we walked out into the cool night air, exchanging only a polite nod before going our separate ways. But for a brief moment, it hadn't felt hostile. It had felt almost easy. The building has a small, rarely used gym in the basement. I like going there late, when it's empty. One night, I was on the treadmill, listening to music, when the door opened. I glanced over, and my eyes widened. It was Ethan. This was the first time I'd seen him in anything other than a suit or his perfectly tailored pajamas. He was wearing a dark t-shirt and athletic pants, looking surprisingly human, yet still intensely focused. He headed straight for the free weights, bypassing the cardio machines entirely. I watched him in the mirror as I ran. He picked up a dumbbell that looked impossibly heavy, and then, without any visible strain, he started doing curls. His muscles flexed under the fabric of his shirt, but he barely seemed to breathe hard. His movements were fluid, powerful, almost too easy. I stared, mesmerized. It was inhuman strength. He finished his set, placed the weights down silently, and reached for a water bottle on the rack. As he picked it up, I noticed something. His hand. It was pale, long-fingered, and around the bottle, the air seemed to shimmer. Condensation immediately bloomed on the cold surface of the bottle, but not just that. It was as if his very touch was making it colder, faster. His hand was unnaturally, profoundly cold. He took a long, slow drink, his eyes scanning the room, and then he caught my gaze in the mirror. My eyes were wide with a mix of fascination and dawning suspicion. He held my gaze for a beat too long, and then, slowly, he put the bottle back down. His lips twitched into a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk, as if he knew exactly what I had seen. I quickly looked away, my heart thumping. He knew I was watching, and he seemed to almost enjoy it. That night, everything I'd observed, every strange detail, coalesced into a chilling suspicion. I was coming home late, around 10 p.m., after a long study session. I felt drained, my mind buzzing with theories I couldn't quite articulate. I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for my floor. Just as the doors were about to close, a hand shot out, stopping them. It was Ethan. He stepped in, completely silent, and stood beside me. We were the only two in the elevator, a small, enclosed space. The air instantly thickened with an unspoken tension. He pressed the button for his floor, directly above mine. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent. The silence between us was heavy, charged with all the unspoken questions swirling in my mind. I could feel his presence beside me, almost a physical pressure. I avoided looking directly at him, opting instead to stare at the illuminated floor numbers above the door. Then, just as we passed the second floor, something shifted. The elevator jolted, a sudden, jarring lurch. The lights flickered, plunged into darkness for a terrifying second, and then came back on, dim and buzzing. The elevator stopped, not at a floor, but somewhere between the second and third. Panic flared in my chest. "What's going on?" I whispered, my voice tight. Ethan, who had been standing perfectly still, suddenly tensed. I felt him move, a subtle shift, but when I glanced at him, he had taken a step back, positioning himself against the far wall of the elevator. The emergency lights, A sickly yellow glow flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. "It seems we're temporarily stuck," he said, his voice tight, rougher than I'd ever heard it. My breath hitched. I could feel the confined space closing in, a primal fear rising. I looked at him, truly looked at him in that dim, unsettling light, and what I saw sent a cold wave through me. His features, usually so composed, were strained. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped the chrome handrail running along the wall, gripping it with a strength that seemed to be warping the metal ever so slightly. His chest, beneath his tailored suit jacket, was rising and falling rapidly, his breathing shallow and quick, almost a gasp. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me. They were dilated, unnaturally wide, the dark irises almost consuming the whites, and there was a flicker of something wild, something hungry, deep within them. They were fixed on me, an intensity that was both terrifying and unsettlingly intimate. "Ethan, are you okay?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me, his eyes devouring me, and then he closed them, squeezing them shut, as if in pain. He took a ragged, shuddering breath, and then another. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, desperate growl, barely audible above the hum of the stalled elevator. You're wearing perfume. Something floral. And something else." My brow furrowed in confusion. "Perfume? What are you talking about?" "It's just my usual, a little vanilla." He opened his eyes, and the wildness was still there, barely contained. He was fighting something, clearly. "The confined space," he rasped, his eyes darting around the small enclosure, then back to me. "And your scent." He seemed to struggle for the right word, as if he couldn't quite articulate what he was experiencing. "My what?" I demanded, feeling a surge of fear mixed with utter bewilderment. He closed his eyes again, shaking his head slightly, as if trying to clear it. When he opened them, the dilated pupils had receded a fraction. The wildness dimmed, replaced by a deep, weary self-control. His breathing seemed to slow, though it was still too fast. He cleared his throat, his voice returning to its smooth, almost normal tone, albeit strained. "Nothing, Clara. My apologies. It's just the claustrophobia. Small spaces. It affects me." He was lying. I knew it. Claustrophobia didn't make your eyes dilate like that. It didn't make you grip metal so hard your knuckles turned white, and it certainly didn't make you comment on someone's scent with such raw intensity. Just then, with a jolt, the elevator lights brightened, and it shuddered back to life, slowly continuing its ascent. It stopped smoothly on Ethan's floor, the doors opening with a soft chime. He stepped out immediately, not meeting my gaze, and without another word, disappeared into his apartment. I stood there, alone again in the elevator, my heart hammering against my ribs. I touched my neck, where the pulse was frantic. I was terrified. But beneath the terror, there was a strange, undeniable current of something else, something that felt like magnetic attraction. I didn't know if it was fear or something else entirely. But I knew, deep down, that the man in 306 was not just strange, he was dangerous, and I was hopelessly, irrevocably drawn to him. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying every strange interaction, every unsettling detail, the cold hand, the inhuman strength, the nocturnal habits, the silence, and then the elevator, his dilated pupils, his desperate breathing, his comment about my scent in that confined space. It wasn't claustrophobia. It was something far more primal. I got out of bed and opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I typed in every keyword I could think of. Unusual sensitivity to smell, supernatural strength, nocturnal habits, unnaturally cold skin, dilated pupils, dark eyes. The search results were ridiculous, sensationalist articles, creepy forums, and then the word vampire. It popped up again and again. Vampire. I scoffed out loud. Vampire. Really, Clara? I'm a journalism student, a rational person. I deal in facts, in evidence. Vampires aren't real. They're myths, folklore, characters in bad romance novels. It was absurd. It had to be. I closed my laptop with a snap, trying to shake off the ridiculous notion. There had to be a logical explanation. Some rare medical condition, perhaps. Some extreme form of allergy. But even as I tried to rationalize it, the image of Ethan's eyes, burning with a raw, almost animal intensity in the dim elevator light, flashed in my mind, and a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, lodged itself in my heart. Despite my growing suspicions, or perhaps because of them, my perception of Ethan began to subtly shift. It wasn't just about the mystery anymore. It was about the complex man behind it. Two incidents in particular softened my view of him, confusing me even more. One afternoon, I came home to find a sign on the lobby door. George is out sick. Temporary doorman on duty. George, our beloved 60-year-old doorman, rarely took a day off. I felt a pang of concern. The next day, I called him to check in. He sounded weak, raspy, battling a nasty flu. "Oh, George," I said, "I'll bring you some soup tonight." Later that evening, as I was walking back from the deli with my homemade chicken noodle soup for George, I saw something surprising. Ethan Drake, impeccably dressed as always, was standing at George's apartment door, a large grocery bag in his hand. He knocked gently, and when George opened the door, looking pale and tired, Ethan offered a small, sincere smile. I saw him hand George the bag, which seemed to contain fresh fruit, some medicine, and what looked like a carton of orange juice. I watched from a discreet distance as they spoke for a few minutes. Ethan's voice low and gentle. He didn't hover or seem impatient. He actually listened, with a genuine concern etched on his face. He even lingered for a moment, making sure George had everything he needed before bidding him good night. When he turned to leave, he caught my eye. My mouth must have been hanging open. He didn't comment, just gave me a small, almost embarrassed nod, then walked back to his apartment. It was such an unexpectedly kind, human gesture from someone I'd labeled as cold and detached. It didn't fit the picture of a dangerous monster. It just didn't. A few days later, I was on my balcony, scrolling through articles on my phone, enjoying the late afternoon sun. Suddenly, I heard a distressed, high-pitched meow. I looked up and saw something that made my heart leap into my throat. Mrs. Henderson's fluffy Persian cat, Mittens, had somehow gotten out onto the ledge of her fifth-floor balcony. Mittens was clinging precariously, her paws slipping, just inches from a terrifying fall. I gasped, frozen in horror. I couldn't reach her. No one could. It was too high. Just as I was about to scream for help, something else happened. From the balcony directly below Mittens, the one belonging to apartment 406, a shadowy figure moved. It was a blur of speed, too fast for human eyes to track. One moment, Mittens was about to fall. The next, a hand shot out, impossibly fast, scooping the terrified cat off the ledge. It was Ethan. He stood there for a brief moment, holding the trembling cat gently against his chest. His gaze, even from 2 floors below, found mine. And in that look, there was a quiet acknowledgement. He knew I had seen his impossible speed. He knew I had witnessed something extraordinary, something supernatural. But then he simply turned, carried Mittens to Mrs. Henderson's apartment, and returned her to her frantic owner, acting as if it were the most normal thing in the world. My mind reeled. The rational part of me was screaming, "Impossible! You imagined it." But the part of me that saw and observed, the journalist, knew what I had witnessed. He was more than human, but he had also saved a cat. He had shown compassion for an old doorman. He was a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, and I found myself inexplicably drawn to the complex layers of his character. I was so confused. Was he dangerous? Or was he, perhaps, protective? That night, I couldn't sleep. The conflicting images of Ethan, the cold, intense man in the elevator, the compassionate neighbor, the impossibly fast cat saver, swirled in my mind. The air felt heavy with unspoken questions. Around 3 a.m., I finally gave up on sleep and stepped out into the quiet hallway, seeking a moment of peace. And there he was. Ethan. He was sitting on the floor by the large window at the end of the hall, looking out at the glittering cityscape, illuminated by the moon and streetlights. He wasn't dressed in his usual finery. He wore dark, comfortable clothes, and his face, usually so guarded, seemed etched with a profound weariness. He looked lonely. He must have heard me, because he turned his head slowly, his dark eyes meeting mine. There was no surprise, no irritation, just a quiet acknowledgement. "You never sleep?" I asked softly, breaking the silence. He gave a small, humorless chuckle. "Rarely, Clara, very rarely." I hesitated, then walked closer, stopping a respectful distance from him. The silence returned, but this time it felt different, less charged, more understanding. I sat down on the carpeted floor, facing him, my back against the opposite wall. "Why are you so strange, Ethan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question had been burning inside me for weeks. He looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes, amusement, then resignation. Straight to the point, as always, a true journalist. He paused, then looked back out the window. "I am different. Always have been. And being different, truly different, often frightens people." "You frighten me," I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes fixed on mine, intense and knowing. "I know," he said, his voice dropping to a low, almost hypnotic tone. "And perhaps I should frighten you more." The air crackled between us. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. His gaze held mine, and for a moment I felt that familiar pull, that dangerous magnetic attraction. My heart thrummed a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Then I surprised myself. "But you also intrigue me," I confessed, the words tasting forbidden on my tongue. "And I hate that I'm so intrigued. I hate that I can't stop thinking about you." A ghost of a sad smile touched his lips. "The feeling, Clara, is entirely mutual." He held my gaze for a long moment, and in his eyes, I saw not just mystery, but a depth of ancient loneliness, a profound sadness that echoed my own more fleeting sense of isolation. It was in that moment, under the pale moonlight, that the wall between us, the one built of suspicion and irritation, finally crumbled, replaced by a fragile, undeniable thread of mutual intrigue. It was no longer just antipathy. It was something far more complicated. Just as I felt I was beginning to understand the intricate enigma that was Ethan, our quiet apartment building was plunged into a fresh horror. Mrs. Patterson, the sweet, elderly lady from apartment 402, hadn't been seen in 3 days. Her mail was piling up. Her cat was meowing incessantly from inside her apartment, and no one could reach her. Her daughter, worried sick, finally called the police. 2 uniformed officers arrived, and the building was abuzz with hushed whispers and worried glances. I watched from my peephole as they tried to get into Mrs. Patterson's apartment. Eventually, they broke the lock. A few minutes later, the officers emerged, looking grim. They sealed off the apartment with police tape. Mrs. Patterson was gone. The apartment was completely empty, yet her purse was still on the table, her keys in the lock. The window to her balcony was open, swaying in the breeze. And then, I heard one of the officers mention a dark stain on the living room carpet, partially covered by a rug. Blood, I immediately thought, my stomach clenching. My journalistic mind instantly recognized the signs of foul play. Panic rippled through the building. Who would harm Mrs. Patterson? Was there a killer among us? I saw Ethan, later that night, observing the police tape from his doorway. His face was unreadable, but his body language was different. He was tense, alert, his gaze sweeping the hall, as if he were scanning for something, hunting for an invisible threat. A cold dread settled over me. All my strange suspicions about him, all my rationalizations, came flooding back. Could he be responsible? The thought sent a chilling jolt through me. I couldn't just sit there. I couldn't just let the fear consume me. Not when I had a gut feeling, a journalist's intuition, that the answer was tied to him. The police would never look beyond a simple missing persons report. But I knew better. I knew there was something far more sinister at play, and I needed answers. My hand was shaking as I pounded on the door of 306. Not a gentle knock this time, but an insistent, desperate series of thuds. The door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting. He stood there, perfectly composed as always, but his dark eyes held a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, a deep, guarded sadness. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "Was it you?" I demanded, my voice raw with a mixture of fear and accusation. "Did you do something to Mrs. Patterson?" His composure wavered for a split second. A deep frown creased his brow. "No," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "Of course not." "Then explain it," I burst out, my frustration overflowing. The strength, the speed, the cold skin, never eating, never being out in the sun. And now Mrs. Patterson is gone, and you're acting like a hunter. I've seen enough, Ethan. What are you? What is going on? He stepped back, his gaze sweeping the empty hallway, as if checking for listeners. "You truly want to know, Clara?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "Are you prepared for the truth?" "Yes!" I practically screamed, my patience at an end. "I want the truth." He reached out, his hand gently but firmly gripping my arm, and pulled me inside his apartment, closing the door behind us with a soft click. The sudden intimacy of his apartment, the dim light, the scent of old books and something faintly metallic, overwhelmed me. He released my arm and turned to face me, his back to the door, his gaze unwavering. The silence in his apartment was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing. I stood there, trembling, waiting. He finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, yet it resonated with an ancient weight. "My name is Ethan Drake. I was born in 1750, in a small village outside Bucharest. I was transformed in 1787, which makes me 237 years old." My breath hitched. My mind reeled, trying to process the impossible words. 237 years old. Bucharest. Transformed. My rational brain screamed at me that this was a lie, a delusion. But every single strange, inexplicable thing about him suddenly made horrifying, undeniable sense. "So, you're a vampire," I whispered, the word feeling foreign and unreal on my tongue. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. Yes, Clara, I am. I felt a cold dread creep through me, but also a strange sense of vindication. I hadn't been crazy. My suspicions had been right. But then, Mrs. Patterson. But you said you didn't hurt Mrs. Patterson. My voice was barely audible. I didn't, he stated, his voice firm. I subsist on blood, yes, but I have arrangements. I acquire blood from hospitals, from blood banks. It is sterile, controlled. I do not harm humans. He paused, then his gaze hardened. But someone in this building, someone is harming them, and I believe I know who. Who? I demanded, my journalistic instinct kicking in, overriding my fear. Marcus, he said, the name a harsh whisper on his lips. Another of my kind, a rogue. He was my sire, my creator. He became uncontrollable, a monster. I left him, decades ago, trying to escape his madness. I thought I had. But he has been hunting me, chasing me across continents for years. He must have found me. He must be here. He walked to his window, looking out at the city lights, his back to me. I came here seeking a quiet place, a sanctuary from him. I didn't realize I would bring the danger with me. And now, Mrs. Patterson, if she is truly gone. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing guilt. I stared at him, my mind a whirlwind of impossible truths. A 237-year-old vampire, being hunted by his creator. It was like something out of a book, but it was real. And it was happening in my apartment building. Why are you telling me all this? I asked, my voice trembling. You could have just let me wonder. Let me be afraid. Why expose yourself? He took a step towards me, his gaze softening, losing its ancient weariness and filling with an emotion that made my breath catch in my throat. Because, Clara, he said, his voice low, intimate, I care about you too much to lie. I have never met anyone like you. Your courage, your relentless pursuit of truth, your infuriating curiosity. I should have driven you away. I tried to, but I couldn't. And I find that I care for your safety more than my own secrecy. My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm in my chest. He was a monster, a creature of the night, a being of impossible age and power. But in that moment, he was also vulnerable, honest, and filled with a profound concern for me. The walls of my rationality crumbled completely. I was terrified, yes, but I also, incredibly, inexplicably, believed him. And I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that I didn't want to run from him. I wanted to help him. The silence in Ethan's apartment stretched, filled with the weight of his confession and the shocking reality of my new understanding. I should have been screaming, running for the door, calling the police, but I didn't. My journalistic mind, the part of me that craved truth and justice, was already working. He didn't kill Mrs. Patterson. Marcus did, and Marcus was a threat to everyone in the building. I looked at Ethan, truly looked at him, the ancient sadness in his eyes, the guilt he carried. He was dangerous, yes, but not to me. Not willingly. He had been alone for centuries, living in shadows, constantly on the run. And now, he was finally trusting someone. He was trusting me. Okay, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Okay, so, rogue vampire. How do we catch him? Ethan looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. You believe me? I'm a journalist, Ethan, I said, trying for a wry smile, though my lips still trembled slightly. I deal in evidence. And everything you just told me, it explains all the evidence. And you didn't hurt me when you could have. You saved George. You saved Mittens. You're not the monster here. Marcus is. I took a deep breath. So, tell me, what's the plan? A slow, tentative smile touched his lips, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face, making him look less ancient, more beautiful. The plan, Clara, he said, his voice filled with a new lightness, involves the basement. I suspect Marcus might be using one of the old storage rooms, or perhaps a utility tunnel, as his lair. He prefers darkness and isolation. And the less traffic, the better. We moved quickly, fueled by a strange mix of adrenaline and desperate determination. Ethan retrieved a long, sharpened piece of wood, a stake, from a hidden compartment in his wall, and handed it to me. For protection, he said, his eyes meeting mine. He may try to disarm me. You'll need this. I gripped the smooth wood, my palms sweating, feeling both terrified and strangely empowered. We made our way down to the basement, the air growing colder, heavier, with each descending step. The utility lights were dim, flickering, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around us. The building's basement was a labyrinth of pipes, dusty storage lockers, and forgotten corners. The metallic tang I sometimes smelled from his apartment was stronger here, mixed with the damp scent of concrete and mildew. Ethan moved silently ahead of me, his senses heightened, constantly scanning the darkness. I followed close behind, my heart pounding, holding the stake like a lifeline. He pointed to faint scuff marks on the concrete floor, leading away from the main storage area, towards an old, disused section of utility tunnels. He's been here, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. I can feel his presence, darker than mine, older, and far more vicious. We found it hidden behind a stack of rusted machinery, a small, old iron door, barely noticeable. It was slightly ajar, letting out a faint, sickly sweet smell. We pushed it open slowly. The room beyond was small, claustrophobic, and incredibly dark. But even in the gloom, we could see things. Empty, discarded blood bags, not the sterile hospital kind Ethan used, but rough, crude containers, scattered bones, and on a dusty makeshift table, a few faded photographs. One of them was of Mrs. Patterson, smiling brightly, taken years ago. Marcus had been watching her. He had chosen her. A cold, raw fear washed over me. This was real. This was a nightmare brought to life. Just as I registered the horror of the scene, a voice, ancient and cruel, echoed from the deepest shadows of the room. Well, Ethan, it seems you finally brought me a little snack. A figure emerged from the darkness. He was older than Ethan, his features sharper, more gaunt, his eyes burning with a malevolent red glow. This was Marcus, and he looked every inch the monster Ethan had described. Ethan immediately stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. Marcus, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Leave her out of this. Your quarrel is with me. Marcus laughed, a chilling, dry sound. Always the noble one, little brother, always protecting the humans. Such a sentimental fool. His eyes, however, were fixed on me, a hungry, calculating glint in their depths. But this one, she smells particularly vibrant, a fine vintage. He moved, a blur of motion, launching himself at Ethan. The fight was a whirlwind of impossible speed and brutal force. Ethan was fast, incredibly strong, but Marcus was older, more cunning, and fueled by a feral bloodlust. They crashed against the walls, the sounds of their struggle echoing through the small room. Marcus was taunting Ethan, mocking his sentimentality, trying to provoke him. At one point, Marcus landed a brutal blow that sent Ethan sprawling against the far wall, dazed. He moved in for the kill, his fangs bared, reaching for Ethan's throat. My mind screamed. Ethan was defenseless. And then I remembered the stake. Without thinking, driven by a primal instinct to protect him, I hurled the stake across the room. "Ethan!" I screamed. He stirred, his eyes darting to me, then to the spinning piece of wood. With a surge of renewed strength, he grabbed it mid-air, just as Marcus closed in. In a swift, powerful motion, Ethan thrust the stake forward. Marcus froze, his eyes widening in shock and disbelief. The stake plunged deep into his chest, right where his dead heart should have been. A guttural shriek tore from his throat, and his body began to convulse, his skin cracking and flaking, turning to dust. He stood there for a horrific moment, his eyes fixed on Ethan with pure hatred. Then he crumbled, dissolving into a pile of ashes that scattered on the dusty floor. The room fell silent again, save for our ragged breathing. Marcus was gone. I stood there, trembling, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. My legs felt like jelly. I dropped to my knees, shaking uncontrollably. Ethan, still breathing heavily, turned to me. He moved towards me, his eyes filled with a raw, intense emotion. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. His touch was cold, but it felt grounding, real. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with a mix of relief and something else, something profound. "Are you all right?" I could only nod, tears streaming down my face. Not of fear, but of sheer relief, of adrenaline, of the overwhelming weight of everything that had just transpired. I looked at him, truly looked at him. The monster was gone, and he was still here. "So," I said, my voice raspy, This is your life." He gave a small, weary smile. "It was. For 200 years, it was. But now I don't know." He brushed a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. "Why, Clara? Why did you help me? You could have run." "Because," I said, my voice gaining strength, "because you're not the monster. You never were. And because I couldn't let him hurt you." I met his gaze. My heart laid bare. "I couldn't." His eyes deepened, a tenderness I hadn't known he possessed shining in their depths. He leaned in, his voice a low, intimate murmur. "You know, I've spent centuries trying to feel nothing, to protect myself from humanity, from its fleeting pains and its fragile joys. And then you arrived. You broke through every wall I built. You infuriated me. You intrigued me. You made me feel alive again. And I find that I am completely, utterly, hopelessly in love with you, Clara." My breath hitched. My heart soared. I'd thought I was imagining the attraction, the connection, but to hear him say it, after everything. "I still think you're incredibly irritating," I whispered, a small, watery smile breaking through my tears. He chuckled, a rich, warm sound that reverberated through me. "And I still think you're utterly impossible, reckless, stubborn, and entirely too curious for your own good." "But," I prompted, my gaze locked on his. He leaned in closer, his cold breath ghosting across my lips. "But," he murmured, his eyes burning with an ancient passion, "I wouldn't have you any other way." And then he kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was raw, desperate, fierce, tasting of dust and relief and centuries of unspoken longing. It was a kiss that sealed our impossible connection, acknowledging the profound and terrifying journey we had just begun. My world shifted again, irrevocably, wonderfully. The police concluded that Mrs. Patterson had simply run away, a sudden, inexplicable decision to disappear without a trace. No one questioned it too deeply. The dark stain on the carpet was cleaned. Life in the apartment building slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, though for a few residents, the whispers of a ghost or a secret admirer lingered. But for Ethan and me, everything had changed. Apartment 306 wasn't empty anymore. In fact, it now had 2 residents. We moved in together, a strange, beautiful, impossible blend of human and immortal. He installed thick, heavy blackout curtains in the living room, so we could still enjoy the sunrise together, in a muted, twilight glow. I learned to appreciate the quiet hours of the night, exploring libraries and hidden corners of the city that only came alive after dark. He still read his ancient books, but now I'd often find him watching me, a soft, loving smile on his lips as I typed away on my laptop, working on my journalism assignments, still chasing stories, but now with a whole new perspective. One evening, as we sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life, his arm around me, he gently kissed my hair. "You know," I murmured, leaning into his embrace. "Eventually, I'm going to ask you to turn me." He tightened his grip, his cold lips brushing my temple. "Eventually, my Clara, but not now, not yet. Now, I just want to savor every single second of your human life with me." I smiled, a contented sigh escaping my lips. "Romantic," he chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that I had grown to love. "I've had 200 years to practice." We sat there, bathed in the soft glow of the city, our hands intertwined. Our story was just beginning. It was unconventional, dangerous, and utterly, wonderfully ours. Who would have thought that the neighbor I so vehemently hated, the mysterious, infuriating man in apartment 306, would turn out to be the love of not just my life, but perhaps many lives to come?